what is data actually trying to do, right? Consumers and insurers expect that, hey, if I'm gonna have a claim, how can you prevent claims from happening?
Right.
So this is where it's changed, right? And I see it firsthand is, I feel like this protection, I want to avoid losses from happening. How can insurance carriers, through access of 150 years of data, right. HSB, Travelers, Plymouth Rock, the Hartford, you've collected everything, right? Why do I have to use you after a claim has happened? What can you do through access of your own data with all these other external factors to be able to prevent those losses from happening?
Welcome to 5 Minutes, your quick dive into the wide-ranging world of insurance, technology, and leadership. I'm Miguel Edwards, and I'll be your guide as we explore these topics that are transforming not just the insurance industry, but the business world at large. Along with sharing observations I've made over the span of my career in insurance, technology, and operations, I'll be chatting with some of the brightest minds in business and leadership. Whether you're a seasoned executive or a rising star, an industry expert, or just curious about how technology is revolutionizing insurance, this is your perfect spot for your weekly dose of insights. This is 5 Minutes.
I'm Jamie Warner. I'm a managing director at Plymouth Rock, and I deal primarily with our data science pricing for home, as well as kind of trying to manage our cloud transformation. And I also teach adjunct at Northeastern in the same space. So, statistician.
Fellow educator. Love it.
Very cool. All right, a little bit of different background. Arlind, Mucaj. I'm with HSB, which is part of Munich Re, and I lead the Digital Risk Solutions Group. And it's pretty much excess and service lines, so non-admitted business, and we develop programs for digital partners. So think about extended service contracts, performance guarantees, and warranties. So data is the core lynch in terms of evaluating if a solution can actually develop a warranty or not.
Got it. A lot of actuarial analysis has to come out of that.
Exactly.
And product development, 100%.
Spot on. And my role is to, first of all, procure the deals, underwrite those deals, price those deals, and actually lead those to customer success. But the nuance here is that we're using the partner's digital channel, so their sales force to actually sell them instead of using a traditional broker, and J model.
One of the things that, maybe I can just kick off a question for both of you, and as I hear you talked about, Arlind, kind of the value of data, that's what I want to kind of talk about first. It seems as though when you start thinking about data, you think about the initiatives that wrap around data, it's such an undervalued concept, right? And it's almost kind of like, we'll get to it, or daggone it, man, I don't want to have to go there. I'd rather do this other thing over here like Portal or something else, right? Yeah. And it's fascinating to me. And I talk about this all the time. Like, with data is the core of our industry, and it gets such little attention. Is that the same perspective you guys share from your carriers?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say just like from history, one of the really hard things is getting at the data. So we have all this like proposed promise from AI, machine learning, all these different things. And then when you go into it, like I've been at carriers where we have, a bunch of different really separate core systems, sometimes that are even managed by someone like Munich Re. And so it's almost impossible to get the data back out of them to actually do that analysis. And I think it might have been your session, but there was a little bit of a discussion about how, insurance is data rich and insight poor. I think that was really kind of where you're going. And it's really true. Like, how do we get that data out of those systems into a place where we can clean it, analyze it, combine it, and then really push it back out to have an insight or an impact on our bottom line, like on that loss ratio.
Right.
And that piece is really hard, and it's messy, and it's expensive.
Right.
So how do you really justify all of that expense?
So accessibility to data is what I'm hearing. On their side?
No, I think I would kind of concur with that. I think I would just take that a step further. And where I'm viewing it is we've collected so much data. I mean, just think about HSB, 156-year-old company. Sure. Tons of data, but it's how you get kind of like the data cleansing part, right? And then developing those insights. And it's this aggregation of that data and tailoring it. Everybody's looking for customized solutions, either, custom accounts, it's like a treaty book of business. Let's say the big nationwide, understanding how all the homes are kind of performing. And then the other angle is about, okay, well, once we've collected, how can then we disperse it and make it actionable so we can send the right alerts to the customer so they can be more proactive. portals are great, right? But there is an engine in the back, and that engine is the data that's speaking to be able to send you those alerts and those critical components about how to take those forward.
100%. So what do you think the impediment is? What do you think the impediment is to kind of getting the investment? And by the way, I mean, this isn't singling out any one carrier. I feel like this is an industry problem, right? What is the impediment to get the attention that's necessary so that we can access? It's almost like there's a box of diamonds and we can't get to it. And it would change our lives if we could get to that box and crack it open. But for some reason, there isn't just the investment or even the willingness. What do you think the impediment is?
Yeah, I mean, I can start. I think, from what I've seen, right, I've been at, for a lot of different major carriers, there's all initiatives about how to best leverage the data and develop those insights. But it just takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of labor, and things change constantly, right? Products, got to go to products almost every 9 months, a year. Just consumer differences also change. So to me, it takes a whole dedicated effort to be able to kind of put that together. And just based on these consumer preferences changing so constantly, it changes constantly, right? So there's a lot of diversion. There's a lot of other transformation and priorities that come into play to impact that top line as well. So I just think as much as we want to develop a transformation program and data being the key, it's about truly getting to it and just other priorities takes it into consideration.
I hear that. Prioritization.
Yeah, prioritization is a big piece, definitely. I think the other piece is it's kind of the never-ending story because different departments calculate things differently. So as soon as you start getting access to the data, you suddenly realize, number one, all the things you didn't realize that maybe you shouldn't have been doing, didn't want to be doing, kind of the historical biases or system, or we bought this company at this time and then we traded this book at this time. And so it's not just a matter of like access, I think, as we just kind of noted, that's the first stage. But the second stage is once you have access, I think it's really hard to explain up how much work and governance there is that's needed to get it to a place where it's actually usable. And like, if we think about that thing that we really want to be doing, which is pricing effective risk, if we don't take those things into account, it doesn't matter that we have all this data because we're going to start pricing risks at the wrong level because they look like our historic book or they look like this other piece. And so our predictions aren't going to be that effective. So it's all that governance piece that takes a lot of like manpower and time and really doesn't show the benefit for a while.
Yeah. Yeah, you're talking about something that's really fascinating, something that's always intrigued me, and we call it data lineage, right? And so it's how do you identify a data element where you are consuming it, and how do you track all the way back to the original source system, understanding all of the transformations that occurred along the way and why those transformations were made in the way that they were. And that's the piece that's often missing. And to your point, who's going to fund that effort to actually decode that? In some cases, I would argue that the person who developed that logic may not even be in the company anymore.
Right. That is such a common occurrence, right? And I just like one thing you mentioned is we have a lot of the carriers that I've been, there's over hundreds of applications for hundreds of different business lines, and you think we all have access to it, but none of them are kind of talking to each other. Yeah, maybe at some strategic level, but when it gets to actually tactical level and people doing something with that and getting the right access to be able to take it and have mass consumption, it's not there. So it just like the governance piece, it's so true. You have to, I think, go through hoops to be able to get a collated view of that to be able to consume by whoever's got to.
Sure. Yeah. And so I think I'm hearing that there's this need to first off have a data strategy, right, at the strategic level, and then how do you marry that to the actual tactics? How do you marry that to the tactics of what actually goes on the ground? And maybe sometimes there's a disconnect. There's a chief data officer sitting at the top who doesn't fully understand how the data is actually being consumed. Does that resonate at all?
I think something that's interesting about, like, if you think about the chief data officer role, which definitely doesn't exist at all companies, but if you think about any of the senior executive roles, a lot of times the folks in those roles didn't necessarily come up in the digital space, like they're coming into it later. Or even if they did, it's changed drastically in the last few years. So if we think about like the techniques, the capabilities, and upskilling to understand what really is going on with data and techniques, I think it's a pretty big ask for someone to understand the groundwork there. And a lot of times if people are coming from the tech space, they don't necessarily have that insurance knowledge. And suddenly I know when I came into insurance, I came from tech, and I really thought to myself, wow, these people are like dumb. Like, why haven't they figured this out? This is really obvious to me. And then I started learning all of the different aspects of why it was so hard to maneuver our data the way I could in like a different field. And that piece I think is really hard because you've got these tech experts and you've got these insurance experts, and that cross-pollination of knowledge is what you need to fix this particular problem.
Yeah.
Oh man, that is so spot on. So the one thing I see, it's about, you know, if you look at the C-suite, right? Getting an equal footing at the C-suite, that the chief data officer has the same respect as the chief underwriting officer, chief claims officer. Because at the end of the day, like you said, a lot of them have the tech background.
Right.
But most insurance carriers, they are risk first,
Yes.
technology second. As much as we like to embrace technology, at the end of the day, it's about that promise that we make to every single customer every day. So getting chief data officers to be at the same level and understand from each one of the business units what you want to do with that data and the insights that it is, then you'll create a better pollination and agreement between those officers to say, okay, you have now my trust, and let's develop a joint data strategy.
You know, it's so funny as I hear you guys talking about the CDO role, I think about a story a guy told me about the sword of Damocles, right? So it's just this guy sitting on a throne and you've got all these swords hanging from his head. And I feel like what, carriers at some point, they acquiesce and they say, okay, fine, we need a chief data officer. And then you have such a short runway to provide value before folks start giving up on that initiative and start defunding it, et cetera, et cetera. So is there an argument to be made that says we've got to find ways to find more rapid and incremental value out of a data program so that we can kind of win to fight another day? Are we not doing that well enough? I mean, I'm trying to see if that's an angle that we can bring about some change.
I mean, even looking at, and I was talking earlier with some of our other colleagues, like if you look at the startups that are presenting, like even here, that are insurtech startups, a lot of them will come to you and they'll come with all these great technology ideas. And then you'll say, hey, do you know what a combined ratio is? And they'll say, never heard of it. Like, can you explain it to me? And so to me, that really resonates on what the problem is, and I even feel this coming from the data science side, is I'm always thinking about the technological problems and how we solve them. And it's really easy to forget that at the end of the day, like you mentioned, the whole goal is to be solvent and to make a profit on top of that. And a lot of these tech advances won't actually make an impact on that for a very long time. So I think it really is essential that we understand, like, what are the current business goals and can we affect any of them this year?
Yeah.
And that piece is really missing a lot of times from even the charter of the chief data officer role. They don't come in and have a P&L and say, you have to do this, right? And so I don't think they even think that that's part of their job necessarily, or no, and then they're caught off guard when everybody's not paying attention, right? And so that to me feels like if you can tie them and also hold the business accountable for, you have to give a business problem to the chief data officer, that would really help in pushing along this progress.
Fantastic perspective.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I think when it comes to the startups and the technology providers, right? At the end of the day, they're either going to improve your processes, get more efficiency, or be able to communicate with your customers a lot quicker. But at the linchpin of all that is data, and these senior officers, they care about either reducing their exposures, getting more premium in the door, either serving an underserved market, expanding the market. And it's what are you learning from your data strategy through the combination enhancing of these technology tools that will get you to do that either A or B. And, to knock technology is an enabler.
Right.
But at the end of the day, like I said, we are serving that promise. So it comes down to underwriting a better risk, and access to that data through enabling technology will get you there.
Access is I keep coming back to that word access, and I want to throw this out there just as, again, I like to do the provocative statements. There's this, every insurance company believes that data and their data represents a unique competitive advantage. That's what everybody believes.
Good.
Now, what if your ability to access the data and leverage it is truly the unique competitive advantage? It's not so much the data itself. And so we focus on these, everybody talks about the crown jewels, right? And so it's that's that diamond box in the corner that you can't get to. So is there an opportunity for us to shift the conversation to say, yeah, okay, the data is there, it's an asset, it's a strategic asset, but really the only way we're going to truly differentiate ourselves is to show how we use that data.
That's thought provoking, but to me, at the end of the day, yeah, I understand the access, but where I keep going to is you have the data,
right?
And the data is going to do what for you, right? And to me, the accessibility of the data, that's just one piece of the equation.
It's the use case.
It's the use case that drives it, right? And like in my example, so I'm working with a lot of digital partners. The access to understand how to price whatever use case it is, there's also limitations in terms of their end customers, how much they can share it with us.
Right.
I just feel we're too globalized to say that the everything you've collected, it has to be paired with everything else that's happening around you, right? With climate changes, that probably it was a little bit different use case 20, 30 years ago. Yeah. Look at what's happening in Dubai just this past week, right? Who would have thought they would have gotten a year's worth of water and rain in a matter of a day?
Right.
Could have an insurer predicted that? No matter what model you put out there, they could have not predicted that.
Sure.
So I think it's a combination of external factors combined with what you have will, I think, differentiate which is a successful insurers versus the other.
Fantastic, yeah.
I think at the end of the day, it's interesting because I don't know that it's just our data anymore. I think that conversation is going to start to shift because if you think about the data that we're bringing in and you think about the data that's starting to become available and the fact that we can start to process it. So if I give an example, in like the auto space, obviously telematics is collected by a lot of times the car companies and then sent to us. Or if you think about home, visual imagery is collected by different companies. And now if we expand that to things like LLMs, there's all this text information we can collect on people that we can now finally process. And so I do think we're going to see a shift from it being just what do we have in-house to which of the vendors can we get the right data from to know more than our competitor does, right, when we try to price that risk. And find those areas where we know that this is a better risk, but someone else might not. And so to me, it's almost not even your internal systems anymore at that point. It's almost your systems for managing and accessing data, period, not necessarily internal core data.
Got it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. That's fascinating.
No, I think, the other piece too, it's what is data actually trying to do, right? Because I feel like we're in an intersection point now where like consumers and insureds expect that, hey, if I'm going to have a claim, how can you prevent claims from happening?
Right.
So this is where it's changed, right? And I see it firsthand is I feel like this protection, it's I want to avoid losses from happening. How can insurance care through access of 150 years of data, right. HSB, Travelers, Plymouth Rock, the Hartford, you've collected everything, right? Why do I have to use you after a claim has happened? What can you do through access of your own data with all these other external factors to be able to prevent those losses from happening or at least diminish and reduce those losses? And I was just reading an article, I think this year in 2024, we've had the largest reduction of auto accidents since in the last 2 decades.
Really?
And there's been all this monitoring that's happening now in cars,
right.
and all these alerts that are happening. It's becoming drivers safer, and then your accidents are becoming preventable.
Interesting, except for Tesla drivers.
Yeah,
That's
Matter of fact, John Riggs was on stage yesterday, and he was talking about all of the IoT that's deployed in commercial buildings. And it's funny, I caught him on the lunch line, and I asked him a question. I said, for all those IoT devices that you're deploying, who owns the data? And because I was thinking, if I own a commercial establishment and you're putting all these sensors, I'd like to have that data. And he's like, well, he suggested, absolutely, the customer owns the data.
That's right.
But they have to request it. We'll provide it to them, but they get to use the data. So now it's a really fascinating point that you were making around where do you get the data from? So now we've got IoT everywhere. We've got the cars with the telematics, and then it's about the creativity and how you put that use case together.
Yeah, and I'm obsessed with this idea of data for resilience, right? So it's really good for us and it's really good for the customers, right? If we prevent the risks, we can be more effective, we can price better, we can reach solvency, we can make a profit, and they also don't have to go through it.
Yes.
And so I love this idea of instead of using it just for pricing, underwriting claims, right? Can we also use it to create preventative situations or make a pool that is not as good become better? And that's a place where I don't think we've been as good traditionally and would really love to see, if I think about what I want to see from insurtech, that's what I want to see.
That's exactly right.
Yes.
And not just, here's another tool.
Yes. Yeah. So, and by the way, and that's another fascinating use case, because if you think about taking the aggregate of all of that data and obviously you anonymize it, but then you create loss prevention programs that you can then take back to a landlord, you can take back to a building or facility manager or a homeowner and say, these are the things that you need to be thinking about, and here's the data that show what happens when you don't pay attention to these dynamics. And then, by the way, think about the value that creates for you as a carrier, bringing additional value to your customer, even if it's just strong emotional connection to a carrier that cares about me, that type of thing. There's all that opportunity.
Yeah, you can relate, right? I mean, at lunchtime, I was just giving you the example about Plymouth Rock. I had my auto insurance with Plymouth, and they have this app where if you're driving safely, they give you $10 Amazon gift cards, right? And yeah, I mean, obviously as a driver, I'm not driving as much since COVID has happened, but it's actually made me more resilient and aware of like my driving habits.
Right.
And yeah, there's other things that are impact, but actually that $10 Amazon card, I'm like, I want to keep a really good record because I keep spending so much money on Amazon, and I know Plymouth Rock's got my back. Right. So that it's just so convenient that we were just talking about that.
Absolutely.
I think Plymouth would actually want me to send them Amazon gift cards if they saw how I drove. So I am not a target client for that. I mean, because I worked at Allstate, we had DriveWise, and they wanted me. I was like, probably not. You might fire me if you saw how I drove.
Well, and I think that's the cool thing about thinking about the different lines of business too, because there's lines like driving where you're constantly doing stuff, but then there's lines like home where some of the preventative pieces aren't, I'm doing something actively bad. It's just something's going on in the walls of your house, right? That you're not aware of. And so that's why I love this like data resilience piece, because you can prevent those accidents by behaviors, and then you can also prevent those accidents by, I didn't know that, my water was leaking or my electricity was poorly wired, or, I bought this house and I read the Zillow report.
Right.
So I think a lot of those things are really exciting and will add a ton of value to the industry, and less people thinking you take this money and then when I'm in the worst time possible, I don't know what I'm getting back. More, you're helping me through the process.
Right. Well, let me close with a question. It's a kind of a silly question. If you had an opportunity to sit in front of the data god, because there's a data god out there that manages all the data, right? If you had an opportunity to sit in front of the data god, what would you ask the data god for? What would be your one ask? You got one ask to say and to encapsulate what you want from data.
Wow. I don't, what's the scope of what I can ask for?
You can ask for anything. You got one wish, and the only thing is you can't ask for another wish. So
okay, you got me there. That's a really good question, because it's such a multifaceted problem. I do think that the big thing that would be the most helpful out of data, if I could do it, is proper identification and tagging. So if I think about a lot of the data that we get, we're still really bad all over the place in every industry about knowing like this record definitely is this person and tied to this home. And so if I think about the risks of, I just came from the AI regulation talk, and one of the things they talked about is the point of insurance is fair discrimination, not unfair discrimination. And so I'm always thinking about that aspect when we think about models. And to prevent unfair discrimination, I need to actually know which risk I'm pricing. And so if I was thinking about that, I would want to know with certainty, this is the exact property, this is the exact person, and I'm definitely right about all their data matching up, which is really hard to do today.
Good.
Yeah, I think kind of expand on that and just be like, when you start with access, right?
Right.
As an underwriter, when I have a specific use case, I just want to go press a button and get thrown all this type of data in me so I can make a better educated guess in terms of how to better underwrite that risk. So I would say, access at the right time, at the right place, based on the right opportunity for the right use case. That would be what I would want to do. And instead of, we have all these portals, an internal portal that allows me to actually have access to that data.
Love that. I think ChatGPT's got something for you soon, right?
It's great.
Help me with this. Got it.
Help me with this, exactly.
I love it. Well, awesome. Guys, thank you so much for the investment in time. This has been a great conversation. I can't thank you enough.
Yeah. Pleasure for having me.
All right.
Thank you for joining this episode of 5 Minutes. If you've enjoyed our discussion, we'd love for you to share it with anyone else you think might find it interesting. Also, please subscribe on whatever podcast platform you're listening on and hit that bell to stay on top of the game with our practical 5-minute episodes. We look forward to seeing you again next week.